I'm Sarah Weiler from Contemporary Education, here today to talk to you about developing students' agency in schools. So this is part of a video series that I'm talking about developing students' agency with regards to how we organize time in schools, how we organize spaces in schools, how we organize relationships in schools, and how we organize resources in schools. But in order to talk about these four organizational factors, time, space, relationships, and resources, we need to talk about what we mean by agency. So agency is often thought about in terms of freedom to choose. Freedom to choose could be in many different contexts at school. But generally speaking, it's giving students freedom to make some decisions about what they study, who they study with, how long they study something for before switching to perhaps another subject, where they're going to study, how they're going to study, how they're going to put things together. It can also be a question of what they're going to study, for instance, in terms of a large thematic content that they can choose some themes within that in order to do a deeper research study. But this is something we're thinking about in terms of breaking up the school structure that comes from a more traditional school model where students arrive at school and they are told what they're doing, how they're doing it, how long they have to do it, where they're doing it, with whom they're doing it. Everything is dictated, and students arrive and they're expected to follow instructions and obey commands. So the idea of developing students' agency in schools is to kind of shake up this structure where everything is predetermined and students have little to no voice in that structure and how school is organized. Yet this idea of agency as freedom to choose still lacks a very important aspect that I want to talk about today. And that is this conscious awareness and responsiveness to the factors involved in the choices that we make. So making a choice, being offered the possibility to make a choice, first is one pathway towards developing students' agency in schools. However, I make the argument that we can't stop there. We have to think about the quality of the choices that they're making, so that they're making choices that are informed, that come from a basis of knowledge, that are intentional, so they know that they're making a choice within an array of possible choices, and that they're meaningful. And there's a meaningfulness that gets to a kind of personal meaningfulness. It's something that it shows you what I stand for as an individual. So that means that different students, different children, different people will make different choices based on what is personally meaningful to them, that's coherent with their other previous beliefs, and that they'll make choices and judgments in their lives that come from this deliberation and reasoning over what the possibilities are, what they mean, and what their hoped for outcomes from making that choice are. So there's also understanding that making the choice in this more amplified view of agency that thinks about the quality of choice making locates that choice in time. So you think about the past, how different reasoning or different reasons exist for making this choice versus that choice versus another choice. In the present moment, what's the context of making that choice? What are all the factors that intersect often in complex ways that we need to make choices? And what are the future implications or the consequences of making that choice? Now, thinking about agency and developing agency in schools, when you think about making a choice from a place of knowledge, then that's kind of the currency of schools. We are dealing with knowledge. That's the purpose of schools. Why do children go to schools? It's to develop their repertoire of knowledge. But thinking about that repertoire of knowledge as this is the basis or the foundation from which I'm going to make informed, intentional, and meaningful choices. When we offer the choices, it merits this reflection upon the choices being made. So it's not simply giving the opportunity to make a choice that develops students' agency, but it's this reflection upon the choice making and understanding the historically developed reasons for making one choice or another that are always conceptual in basis, that enables students and empowers them to make more informed, intentional, and meaningful choices. That's the truest expression of their agency. Having said all of that, we need to think about also the development of students' agencies in schools as almost a societal insurance against the grave ills of dogma and indoctrination and the kind of non-democratic governments that threaten democratic societies. So if we go back to, Nazi Germany or Maoist China, and you think about how students in schools were indoctrinated, they were taught exactly what to think and with no space for reasoning or deliberation about what they should think, what they should believe. This, I think, we can find in schools today, obviously not with such maybe nefarious indoctrination of, ideas that are very prejudiced and discriminatory and hateful. However, when we show up to school as educators or even as parents in your households, and you show up with, I have the truth and this is what you're going to do and you need to follow my commands, we're not opening up a space for teaching children how to think. So there's this distinction I've talked about in other videos about teaching what to think versus teaching how to think. And teaching how to think is about developing children's rational capabilities to make informed, intentional, and meaningful decisions in their lives that come from, again, this place of knowledge. Thinking, again, locating, my decision follows from this, and this is what follows from my decision, the past, the present, and the future. So I want to challenge parents and educators and parents as educators and teachers in schools and administrators in schools to not limit the idea of developing agency in the classroom and in schools to just giving students the chance to make choices, but really grappling with what those choices mean. And just to end this video, I want to bring an idea from the great educational philosopher John Dewey, that he made a distinction between routine action and thought and reflected action and thought. And routine action and thought is the kind of thinking and action that human beings, we're engaged in a lot in our lives, that we often don't step back and think about, why am I acting this way, or why am I thinking this way? It's just something perhaps we see everybody around us in our social context. They do things like this, they think like this, and so we're repeating and reproducing this way of thinking or this way of acting, versus reflected action and reflected thought, where you really think about why. That's the core question. Why am I acting this way? Why am I thinking like this? And challenging yourself, oftentimes with others, to revise and reconstruct and reconstitute your thoughts and actions in a way that's more aligned with your core beliefs and your purpose and your whys. So on that thought, I think of a reflection to take about developing students' agency in schools is that all too often we're telling students what to do, how to do it, with whom to do it, how long they have to do it, where to do it. But it's very peculiar that we often don't talk about why to do it. What is the why? We take for granted that this is just the way you're supposed to think, the way you're supposed to act, rather than thinking about what that follows from historically, and what follows from it in terms of future implications. So agency is, again, not just about choice making, but the quality of choice making, making choices from a place of knowledge, making choices that are informed, that are intentional, and that are meaningful. So in this series, this video series, I'm going to talk about this more amplified view of agency, and I'm going to talk about how it manifests, or how we can manifest it through the way that schooling is organized. And I always think that it's interesting to think about how we organize school within the structure of time, space, relationships, and resources. So I have a video about developing students' agency in schools, thinking about time, thinking about space, thinking about relationships, and thinking about resources. I hope that it's helpful. I hope that it's good food for thought. And I welcome you and others to please join me in a dialogue about developing students' agency in schools at contemporaryeducation.com. And thank you very much.